What if I told you that one of Texas' most sought-after handbag brands began with piles of scrap leather everyone else wanted to throw away? When 41-year-old Rachel Lawson filled her old barn with discarded leather instead of selling her family's struggling ranch, the whole town laughed and called it junk. But hidden inside her grandmother's faded notebook was an idea that would transform forgotten scraps into luxury handbags, create a thriving business, and prove that sometimes the most valuable treasures are the ones the world is too quick to abandon. Early spring settled gently across the rolling ranchlands outside Fredericksburg, Texas. Pale gray clouds drifted overhead as cool winds carried the scent of damp earth, fresh grass, and light rain lingering after a long, dry winter. Rachel Lawson had once believed that beautiful things were rarely created from perfect materials. They were created by people patient enough to recognize beauty before anyone else could see it. At 41 years old, she stood just under 5 feet 8 inches tall with the graceful posture of someone who had spent years sketching designs, inspecting fabrics, and supervising product prototypes rather than sitting behind conference tables. Her chestnut brown hair, brushed just past her shoulders, was threaded with a few strands of silver that had appeared far earlier than age alone should have allowed. Her hazel eyes remained sharp and observant, constantly noticing details most people ignored, tiny imperfections in stitching, subtle differences in leather grain, or the way sunlight reflected differently across various textures. Years spent handling cutting tools and sewing equipment had left faint scars across her fingertips, while countless deadlines inside Austin's fast-moving fashion industry had quietly taught her patience instead of panic. Friends often joked that Rachel could hold a damaged handbag in her hands for only a few seconds before explaining exactly how it had been made. They admired her talent, but few understood how deeply she believed that every material deserved one more chance before being discarded. That belief became the only thing holding her together after losing her husband. Daniel Lawson had passed away 18 months earlier after a long battle with pancreatic cancer. He had been 44 years old, tall and broad-shouldered with neatly combed dark hair that slowly turned silver during his treatments. His warm blue eyes rarely lost their kindness, even through the hardest months of illness. Before becoming sick, Daniel worked as a financial consultant, but numbers never defined him. He believed success meant leaving people stronger than when you found them. During endless evenings in hospital rooms, he often encouraged Rachel to keep designing, reminding her that creativity had carried her through every difficult season of life. His absence left a silence inside their Austin apartment that no amount of work could erase. For nearly a year, Rachel buried herself inside the fashion company where she had spent almost 15 years designing handbags and small leather accessories. Every new collection distracted her during the day, but every evening, she returned to an empty home filled with memories she could no longer outrun. Eventually, another phone call changed everything. Her father admitted the family ranch outside Fredericksburg could no longer depend solely on cattle. The ranch itself remained healthy. The herd remained strong. But beef prices had fallen steadily while fuel, feed, equipment repairs, and insurance costs climbed every season. The family still owned more than 200 acres of rolling pasture. Yet every financial report looked thinner than the year before. Rachel resigned from her job less than 3 weeks later. Many coworkers assumed grief had clouded her judgment. She quietly packed her sketchbooks, leather tools, and sewing kit before driving west toward the ranch where she had grown up. The Lawson Ranch looked almost unchanged. Longhorn cattle grazed peacefully beneath wide Texas skies. Weathered fences still stretched across green hills, and the old red barn leaned slightly after decades of standing against wind and storms. Yet beneath that familiar beauty lay constant financial pressure. Rachel's father, Thomas Lawson, was 68 years old, standing just over 6 feet with the solid frame of a lifelong rancher. Thick silver hair rested beneath a faded cowboy hat, while a neatly trimmed white beard framed his sun-weathered face. His deep brown eyes reflected quiet wisdom mixed with stubborn determination. Years of droughts, floods, unstable cattle markets, and endless physical labor had taught him never to complain about hardship. He respected practical solutions above clever ideas and believed every dollar should work twice before being spent once. Although he loved his daughter deeply, He worried she had spent too many years designing products for wealthy city customers to understand the realities of keeping a ranch alive. "I'm glad you're home," Thomas told her one evening while repairing an old gate. "I just wish it were under better circumstances." Rachel smiled gently. "So do I." Several weeks later, she drove to a large leather tannery nearly 40 miles outside town. She originally intended to purchase a few quality leather hides for personal craft projects. Instead, she noticed enormous containers stacked behind one warehouse. They overflowed with leather. Thousands of irregular pieces. Some were too narrow. Others had unusual curves. Some displayed slight color differences. Yet every piece was genuine top-grain leather. A production supervisor named Victor Ramirez walked over after noticing her curiosity. Victor was 53 years old, heavily built, with short black hair touched by gray around his temples. His strong hands carried permanent stains from decades inside leather manufacturing, while his straightforward personality reflected years spent solving production problems rather than discussing theory. "Most of that's headed for the grinder," Victor explained. Rachel looked surprised. "All of it?" He nodded. "Our new cutting machines leave smaller leftover pieces. They're excellent leather. So why throw them away? They're too irregular for large factory production." He shrugged. "We can't efficiently make jackets or large handbags from scraps." Rachel picked up one piece after another. The leather felt soft, strong, beautiful, not damaged. Simply inconvenient. "How much?" she asked. Victor laughed. "You really want it?" "I do." After calculating disposal costs, Victor quoted a price barely higher than transportation expenses. Rachel purchased the entire lot. More than 2 tons of premium leather. Truck after truck arrived at the Lawson ranch over the next several days. Soon, enormous stacks of carefully bundled leather filled one side of the old equipment barn. Neighbors slowed their pickups whenever they drove past. Some laughed openly. Others shook their heads. Within a week, the entire town had given Rachel's growing collection a nickname: the Scrap Mountain. "Poor woman," someone muttered at the feed store. Losing Daniel must have broken something inside her. Rachel heard the rumors. She never answered them. One rainy afternoon, she began cleaning her late grandmother's forgotten workshop behind the barn. Dust floated through narrow beams of light, entering cracked wooden walls. Rusted leather punches rested beside old stitching awls. Faded patterns hung from nails exactly where they had been left decades earlier. Hidden inside a weathered cabinet, she discovered a small, dented tin box wrapped in yellowed cloth. Inside rested a leather-bound notebook dated 1966. Most pages contained careful notes about repairing saddles, handbags, belts, and ranch equipment using leftover scraps instead of expensive new hides. Then Rachel reached the final page. Only one sentence had been written in faded ink. "People don't carry leather because it's perfect. They carry the story it survives." She stared at the words for a long time. Most people would have dismissed them as sentimental advice. Rachel did not. She remembered every luxury handbag she had helped design in Austin. Factories wasted enormous amounts of beautiful leather simply because production demanded perfectly uniform pieces. What if beauty didn't require uniformity? What if every different texture, every different shade, every unusual shape became part of the design itself? For the next several weeks, she disappeared into the workshop. She studied traditional saddle stitching, practiced edge burnishing, experimented with joining dozens of smaller leather pieces into seamless panels. She sketched wallets, crossbody bags, handbags, travel pouches. Every evening, the workbench filled with prototypes, failed experiments, leather samples, thread colors, and pages of handwritten notes. Neighbors assumed she planned to resell the leather for a quick profit. Rachel never corrected them. Before sunrise the following morning, instead of advertising the leather for resale, Rachel picked up her phone. She called the local Veterans Vocational Training Center. "I heard you're retiring some industrial leather sewing machines," she said calmly. "If they're still available, I'd like to take every one of them." The first summer after Rachel Lawson filled the old barn with mountains of discarded leather arrived beneath wide Texas skies washed pale by relentless sunshine. Warm winds drifted across the rolling pastures outside Fredericksburg, carrying the scent of fresh-cut hay, cedar trees, and distant rain that never quite reached the ranch. The first sign that people had noticed Rachel's strange new project came from someone she had never met. A tourist driving through Fredericksburg stopped beside the Lawson ranch after seeing several volunteers sitting beneath the barn awning, carefully arranging hundreds of oddly shaped leather pieces across long wooden tables. Curious, he filmed a short video. The recording showed Rachel patiently matching different shades of brown, chestnut, and mahogany leather like pieces of an enormous puzzle before hand-stitching them together into elegant wallets. The volunteers worked quietly beside her while stacks of discarded leather slowly transformed into finished products. That evening, the video appeared online beneath a sarcastic headline: "The woman who thinks leather scraps can become luxury bags." By sunrise, it had spread through Facebook groups, Instagram pages, YouTube shorts, and artisan craft forums across Texas. Thousands of comments appeared. "Nobody spends $300 on trash. Luxury bags aren't made from leftovers. She should have sold the leather while she still had the chance." Others claimed grief had caused Rachel to lose her judgment after Daniel's death. Rachel opened the video only once. She read several comments before quietly closing her laptop. 15 years inside the fashion industry had taught her something the internet never seemed to understand. Trends changed every season. Quality never did. Instead of expanding the family's cattle operation, Rachel devoted nearly every waking hour to her workshop. Every morning began with sorting leather by thickness, flexibility, grain pattern, and natural color variation. Rather than hiding imperfections, she began designing around them. Tiny scars became decorative accents. Slight color changes became flowing patterns. Curved scraps became rounded corners that no factory cutting machine would ever create. Every design started as pencil sketches before becoming cardboard templates, then carefully stitched leather prototypes. The industrial sewing machines she received from the Veterans Vocational Center proved invaluable. Although old and scratched from decades of use, each machine still produced strong, beautiful seams after careful restoration. Rachel rebuilt them one by one, replacing worn belts, cleaning rusted gears, and adjusting tension by hand until they worked almost like new. The volunteers who helped her were not professional craftsmen. Most were military veterans rebuilding their own lives after difficult years. One of them became especially important. His name was Marcus Doyle. 46 years old, Marcus possessed a broad, muscular frame that remained impressive despite an old knee injury that left him walking with a slight limp. Short-cropped sandy hair mixed with early gray surrounded a weathered face marked by countless days beneath desert sun during multiple overseas deployments. A neatly trimmed beard softened his square jaw, while calm blue eyes revealed both quiet sadness and remarkable patience. After leaving the Army, Marcus struggled for years to adjust to civilian life, finding temporary jobs, but never work that truly gave him purpose. Leathercraft became therapy more than employment. He discovered that careful stitching demanded the same concentration that once quieted his mind during military service. "You don't rush leather," Rachel told him one afternoon while correcting a seam. Marcus nodded. "Kind of like rebuilding people." Rachel smiled. "Exactly." Soon the workshop developed its own rhythm. Rachel designed new patterns while Marcus trained other volunteers to master saddle stitching, edge burnishing, and hand finishing techniques. Every completed wallet passed through multiple inspections before receiving a small leather tag embossed with one simple sentence: "Made from what others left behind." Progress remained painfully slow. Rachel rejected nearly half of everything they produced. One wallet developed loose stitching after only 3 weeks of testing. Another handbag lost its shape beneath summer heat. Several purses returned from customers because magnetic closures failed. Each returned product hurt. Not because of the money, because Rachel refused to attach her family's name to anything she would not proudly carry herself. Thomas Lawson watched silently as boxes of rejected products accumulated inside one corner of the workshop. "You're throwing away a lot of work," he observed one evening. Rachel carefully examined another imperfect seam. "I'm protecting everything that comes after it." Instead of arguing, Thomas quietly helped dismantle the defective bags so the hardware could be reused. Outside the workshop, the town continued laughing. Whenever people passed the ranch, they slowed their trucks to look toward the scrap mountain, now slightly smaller, but still enormous. Feed store conversations became predictable. Has she sold one yet? Probably to her relatives. Nobody wants patchwork leather. Rachel ignored every rumor. What mattered were the notebooks covering her workbench. Each customer received a handwritten card asking for honest feedback after 30 days of use. She recorded everything: how comfortably the straps carried weight, whether corners wore evenly, how different leather combinations aged over time, how stitching responded to heat, rain, and daily use. Her notebooks became thicker every month. Toward the end of the second year, something unexpected happened. Fredericksburg welcomed thousands of tourists during its annual Arts and Heritage Festival. Rachel reluctantly rented a small booth near the town square, expecting little more than curiosity. At first, visitors simply stared. Every bag looked different. No two wallets shared exactly the same pattern. Some displayed warm honey-colored leather beside deep espresso brown. Others carried tiny natural marks that made each piece unmistakably unique. One woman finally picked up a handbag. She turned it over several times. "Is there another one like this?" Rachel smiled softly. "No." The woman bought it immediately. Then another customer purchased a wallet. Before noon, nearly every product on the table had disappeared. Visitors asked the same question again and again. "Can you make another exactly like this?" Rachel always answered the same way: "I can make something equally beautiful, but never exactly the same." That became the greatest strength of the entire business. People were no longer buying leather. They were buying a story no factory could ever repeat. As the sun set behind the Texas hills, Rachel opened her grandmother's old notebook once again. Beneath the faded sentence: "People don't carry leather because it's perfect. They carry the story it survives." She quietly added her own: "Every imperfect piece carries a story that no perfect piece ever could." The third spring arrived beneath soft gray skies stretching across the Texas hill country. Gentle rain drifted over Fredericksburg while cool breezes carried the scent of wet cedar, fresh pasture grass, and blooming wildflowers surrounding the Lawson ranch. 3 years had passed since Rachel Lawson filled her old barn with what the entire town once called the Scrap Mountain. The piles of discarded leather had grown noticeably smaller, replaced instead by neatly organized shelves holding carefully sorted materials waiting to become wallets, handbags, journals, belts, and travel accessories. Every corner of the workshop reflected quiet discipline rather than hurried production. Rachel still believed beautiful craftsmanship could never be rushed. The first major breakthrough came from somewhere Rachel never expected. A nationally respected leathercraft blogger named Nathan Brooks published a detailed article titled "The Texas Woman Turning Factory Waste into Heirloom Bags." Nathan was 38 years old, tall and slender with dark curly hair, usually tucked beneath a worn leather cap. A short beard framed his thoughtful face, while curious green eyes revealed the personality of someone who loved discovering overlooked artisans more than famous luxury brands. Before becoming a full-time writer, Nathan had spent nearly 15 years restoring vintage saddles and handmade luggage throughout the Southwest. That experience taught him to recognize exceptional craftsmanship almost immediately. Unlike many online influencers chasing trends, Nathan cared deeply about the history behind every handmade object. He had quietly purchased one of Rachel's patchwork wallets months earlier without introducing himself. After carrying it every day for nearly 6 months, he finally decided to write about it. His review surprised thousands of readers. He never described Rachel's products as recycled. He described them as carefully rescued. Within days, the article spread through artisan leather communities across the United States. Orders arrived from Colorado, Montana, Tennessee, even New York. Some customers waited several months rather than buying factory-made luxury bags immediately available elsewhere. Rachel remained cautious. She refused to increase production simply because demand increased. "We'll grow," she reminded Marcus one morning. "But we won't hurry." Marcus nodded. "People are buying our work because every stitch means something. They'll notice the day we stop believing that." Instead of purchasing expensive automated machinery, Rachel invested in improving skills. Every Friday afternoon, the workshop closed early so everyone could review finished products together. They examined stitching consistency, edge finishing, leather alignment, hardware durability, and long-term wear from customer returns. Every mistake became a lesson shared openly rather than hidden. One rainy afternoon, another unexpected visitor arrived. A university vehicle stopped outside the workshop. A woman carrying notebooks instead of cameras stepped out. Her name was Dr. Emma Collins. 49 years old, Emma possessed a graceful, slender build shaped by decades of visiting textile mills, manufacturing plants, and artisan workshops rather than remaining inside lecture halls. Her shoulder-length silver-blonde hair rested neatly behind her ears, while intelligent blue eyes constantly examined materials before speaking. Fine lines across her fair face reflected years spent traveling between factories throughout Europe and North America studying sustainable manufacturing systems. Calm, analytical, and endlessly curious, Emma served as one of the University of Texas at Austin's leading professors of sustainable industrial design. Former students admired her unusual habit of asking simple questions that often revealed extraordinary answers. She introduced herself warmly. "I've been reading about your workshop." Rachel smiled politely. "I hope the article wasn't exaggerated." Emma looked around the barn. "I don't think it told enough." Over the following weeks, Emma returned repeatedly with several graduate students. Rather than focusing on finished handbags, they carefully documented every stage of Rachel's process. They weighed incoming leather scraps, measured material utilization, recorded waste generated during production, compared factory cutting methods with Rachel's patchwork designs, calculated production costs, observed hand-stitching techniques, interviewed customers, even examined decades-old luxury bags beside Rachel's newer creations. The results astonished everyone involved. Traditional factories discarded enormous quantities of perfectly usable leather because production favored large, uniform panels. Rachel's workshop approached the same material differently. Every unusual shape became useful. Small triangular pieces reinforced corners. Thin strips formed decorative handles. Irregular curves became artistic design features. Even the smallest leftovers eventually became keychains, zipper pulls, bookmarks, or decorative tags. Almost nothing entered the trash. One afternoon, Emma quietly spread dozens of charts across Rachel's workbench. "I think you've built something important." Rachel looked uncertain. "I just hate wasting good leather." Emma smiled gently. "Exactly." She drew several arrows connecting different production stages. Traditional manufacturing creates products, then deals with waste afterward. She pointed toward Rachel's workshop. "You begin with the waste and design the products around it." Rachel studied the diagrams silently. Emma carefully wrote 5 words across the top page. "Zero waste leather craft manufacturing." Rachel repeated the phrase quietly. "I've never heard that before." "Most people haven't," Emma admitted. "But you've been practicing it for years." The university expanded the research. Graduate students spent months documenting production efficiency, material recovery rates, durability testing, customer satisfaction, environmental impact, and economic performance. Independent reviewers verified the findings. Rachel's workshop recovered nearly every usable piece of leather. Material costs remained dramatically lower than conventional manufacturers. Each finished product remained completely unique. Waste disposal became almost non-existent. The lifespan of premium leather increased substantially instead of ending inside industrial grinders. When Emma's research paper was finally published, design journals quickly highlighted the study. Sustainability conferences invited Rachel to speak. Furniture manufacturers requested consultations. Leather companies began re-evaluating how they handled production leftovers. Soon the small workshop behind the Lawson ranch officially became a practical teaching studio for University of Texas design students. Throughout every semester, young designers arrived carrying sketchbooks instead of expectations. Rachel never began lessons by talking about handbags. Instead, she placed a handful of oddly shaped leather scraps across the table. Then she smiled. "What beautiful thing," she asked quietly. "Can you see that nobody else sees yet?" As the students looked down at the scattered pieces, Rachel opened her grandmother's notebook once more. Beneath the familiar sentence, "People don't carry leather because it's perfect. They carry the story it survives." She added another line. "Nothing becomes waste until imagination decides to stop looking." For more springs passed beneath the wide Texas sky. Gentle rains drifted across the rolling hills surrounding Fredericksburg, while fields of bluebonnets bloomed beside quiet country roads. Warm breezes carried the scent of cedar, fresh grass, and newly worked leather flowing through the open doors of the Lawson workshop. Time had transformed Rachel Lawson's small workshop into something she had never intended to build. What began as one grieving widow's attempt to rescue discarded leather had quietly become a destination for artisans throughout the American Southwest. Every week, pickup trucks and vans arrived carrying license plates from Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Colorado. Some visitors brought notebooks filled with sketches. Others carried boxes of discarded leather collected from local tanneries. Many simply wanted to understand how someone had turned factory waste into products displayed beside the world's finest luxury brands. Rachel herself had changed very little. At 45 years old, her silver strands had become more noticeable against her chestnut hair, yet the calm confidence in her hazel eyes remained exactly the same. Years of cutting, stitching, sanding, and polishing leather had strengthened her hands while adding new scars beside the old ones. Every morning still began before sunrise. She unlocked the workshop, swept the wooden floor herself, inspected every workbench, and quietly opened her grandmother's notebook before anyone else arrived. Success had never made her feel like the owner of the workshop. She still considered herself its first student. Marcus Doyle now supervised much of the daily craftsmanship. The veterans who had once entered the workshop searching for purpose had become master leatherworkers capable of producing pieces equal to Rachel's own standards. Rather than creating a factory, Rachel insisted every artisan learn every stage of production, from selecting scrap leather to burnishing the final edge by hand. No one specialized in only one task because she believed understanding the entire journey gave every product its soul. The workshop slowly became known for something no luxury manufacturer could promise. No two bags were ever identical. Each carried a different arrangement of leather grains, natural markings, colors, and textures that could never be repeated again. Word spread throughout the artisan community. Independent leather brands stopped treating scrap leather as industrial waste. Small workshops across Texas began contacting nearby tanneries, asking to purchase leftovers once destined for disposal. Similar requests soon appeared in Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Colorado. What factories had previously paid to discard suddenly became valuable raw material for hundreds of independent craftsmen. One autumn morning, another visitor arrived carrying a large leather portfolio instead of luggage. Her name was Sophia Bennett. Sophia, 47 years old, stood about 5'7" with an elegant posture shaped by decades inside the luxury fashion industry. Her shoulder-length black hair was carefully styled, framing a graceful face highlighted by warm olive skin and intelligent dark brown eyes that noticed craftsmanship before appearances. Fine lines around her eyes reflected years spent evaluating artisans throughout Europe and North America rather than sitting inside executive offices. As senior buying director for one of America's most respected luxury fashion retailers, Sophia had built her reputation by discovering exceptional makers long before they became internationally recognized. Calm, meticulous, and difficult to impress, she believed genuine luxury began with authenticity rather than expensive advertising. She spent nearly an entire day walking through Rachel's workshop. She watched artisans hand-stitch every seam. She examined rejected prototypes. She studied shelves containing thousands of carefully sorted leather scraps. Finally, she picked up one finished handbag. She turned it over silently, then looked directly at Rachel. "I've reviewed products from Italy, France, and Japan." Rachel smiled politely, and Sophia gently traced one naturally weathered leather panel. "I've never seen two imperfections fit together this beautifully." Rachel answered quietly. "They stopped being imperfections the day someone cared enough to understand them." Sophia smiled. "That's exactly what our customers have been searching for." Several weeks later, Rachel received the workshop's largest order since opening. The retailer requested a limited collection available only through selected flagship stores. Rachel accepted, with one condition. Every bag would continue being made by hand. Every artisan would sign the inside leather label. Production would never exceed what the workshop could honestly complete without sacrificing quality. To many business advisors, the decision seemed foolish. Rachel refused to build an assembly line. She refused outside investors. She refused to replace handmade stitching with automated equipment. Demand continued growing anyway. Meanwhile, universities expanded their involvement. Design schools throughout Texas introduced courses focused on zero-waste manufacturing, using Rachel's workshop as a practical case study. Students no longer learned sustainability only through textbooks. They visited the ranch, sorted leather scraps, designed products from irregular materials, and discovered that creativity often began where standard manufacturing stopped. National television soon arrived. Morning shows, business programs, documentary crews, lifestyle magazines. One televised interview became especially memorable. The host held one of Rachel's handbags before millions of viewers. "So tell us," he asked with a smile, "how does trash become luxury?" Rachel gently accepted the bag. She looked down at the carefully stitched leather before answering. "It doesn't." The interviewer looked confused. Rachel smiled. "It was never trash. It was only waiting for someone to recognize its value." The interview spread across the country. Soon newspapers, magazines, and television stations repeated the same nickname. The woman who turned leather scraps into luxury. Rachel never introduced herself that way. She preferred something much simpler. Leatherworker, teacher, student. As another spring arrived, visitors booked workshop tours months in advance. Many of the same people who once laughed at the scrap mountain now waited patiently on reservation lists, hoping to purchase a single handmade bag. One evening, after the last tour group departed, Rachel stood quietly inside the workshop. The shelves that once overflowed with forgotten leather now held beautiful products waiting to begin new journeys. She opened her grandmother's notebook. Beneath the familiar sentence, "People don't carry leather because it's perfect. They carry the story it survives." Rachel carefully wrote another line. "The greatest luxury is not perfection. It is giving forgotten things the chance to matter again." 7 more years passed beneath the endless skies of the Texas Hill Country. Every spring arrived with fields of bluebonnets stretching across rolling pastures, gentle rains soaking the rich earth, and warm winds carrying the familiar scent of cedar, leather, and fresh beginnings through the open doors of the Lawson workshop. Rachel Lawson was 52 now. Time had softened her face without dimming the quiet determination that had carried her through every difficult season. More silver rested among her chestnut hair, usually tied loosely behind her neck while she worked. The small scars across her hands had multiplied after years of cutting, stitching, burnishing, and shaping leather by hand. Yet she still believed every morning should begin exactly the same way. Before speaking to visitors, before reviewing orders, before opening the workshop, she walked slowly through the old barn that had once held nothing but forgotten scraps. She touched the workbenches one by one, greeted the artisans already beginning their day, and finally paused before her grandmother's notebook resting inside its weathered tin box. The workshop had become something far greater than a successful business. It had become a movement. Across the United States, more than 600 independent leather workshops had adopted Rachel's zero-waste manufacturing philosophy. Small family businesses in Texas, Arizona, Montana, Tennessee, Kentucky, and the Carolinas began purchasing factory offcuts once destined for landfills. Large tanneries that previously paid enormous disposal costs now partnered with local artisans instead, knowing every discarded piece might become part of a beautiful handcrafted product. Industry reports estimated that thousands of tons of premium leather were being rescued every year because hundreds of craftsmen had learned to see possibility where factories once saw waste. Rachel never claimed ownership of the idea. Whenever reporters asked how she felt about inspiring an entire industry, she answered exactly the same way. "I only shared what someone else shared with me." Universities continued expanding their research. Students who had first visited the Lawson workshop years earlier had become successful designers, workshop owners, sustainability consultants, and instructors themselves. Many returned each spring with their own apprentices, creating a tradition that stretched far beyond Texas. One warm October afternoon, another visitor quietly arrived. His name was Benjamin Hayes. Benjamin was 58 years old, tall and lean, with neatly combed silver hair and thoughtful brown eyes that revealed remarkable patience. Deep lines around his face reflected decades spent listening more than speaking. As director of the American Heritage Craft Foundation, Benjamin had devoted nearly 30 years to preserving disappearing trades across rural America. He believed craftsmanship represented more than skill. It preserved memory, family history, and community identity. Soft-spoken and humble, he rarely praised anyone quickly because he understood true mastery revealed itself only after years of consistency. Instead of touring the workshop immediately, Benjamin spent the morning speaking with everyone except Rachel. He listened to veterans describing how leathercraft helped them rebuild their lives. He spoke with young apprentices learning their first saddle stitch. He watched retired ranchers teaching teenagers how to select quality leather by touch alone. Only late that afternoon did he finally sit beside Rachel beneath the old oak tree outside the workshop. "You know," Benjamin said quietly, "most organizations preserve old buildings." Rachel smiled. "And you?" "We try to preserve the people who still remember how to create beauty with their hands." He looked toward the busy workshop. "I think you've preserved something even more valuable." Rachel tilted her head slightly. "What is that?" He smiled warmly. "The belief that nothing beautiful begins with perfection." Several months later, the American Heritage Craft Foundation officially recognized the Lawson Workshop as a national center for traditional leathercraft education. Rather than functioning only as a business, the workshop became a permanent training center where experienced artisans freely taught future generations. Rachel accepted the honor with gratitude, but requested one condition. "No classrooms," she said. Benjamin looked surprised. "No." Rachel shook her head. "People learn this craft by sitting beside someone, not by watching slides." So nothing changed. Students still gathered around wooden benches. Mistakes were still corrected by patient hands instead of written exams. Stories still passed naturally between generations, while leather slowly became something beautiful. One quiet winter evening, after the final visitors had left, Rachel walked alone into her grandmother's original workshop. The room looked almost exactly as it had the day she first opened the old tin box years earlier. Only one thing had changed. Above the workbench now hung a hand-carved cedar sign. The words had been carefully engraved by Marcus and every artisan who had worked beside Rachel over the years. "People don't carry leather because it's perfect. They carry the story it survives." Rachel stood silently before it. A young design student visiting that afternoon had asked her one simple question. "What was the greatest gift your grandmother ever gave you?" Rachel had smiled before answering. "She never taught me how to find perfect leather. She gently touched the carved wood. She taught me how to see beauty in every imperfect piece." Years passed. Eventually, nobody remembered the towering piles of discarded leather once mocked as the scrap mountain. Nobody remembered the laughter at the feed store. Nobody remembered the predictions that Rachel's workshop would fail. What people remembered instead was something far more meaningful. A woman who refused to measure value by appearance. Someone who looked at forgotten pieces of leather and imagined a second life instead of a final ending. She never invented a new kind of leather. She simply gave old leather another chance to tell its story. From those forgotten scraps, a respected American craftsmanship brand was born. Hundreds of artisans found meaningful careers. Veterans rebuilt their confidence. Family workshops found new purpose. Thousands of tons of beautiful leather escaped landfills every year. And an entire generation of designers discovered that sustainable fashion did not begin with producing more. Sometimes, it began by honoring what already existed. Before locking the workshop for the evening, Rachel opened her grandmother's notebook one final time. Beneath every sentence she had written through the years, she added one last line. "The world changed the day people stopped asking what leather had been and started asking what it could still become." Sometimes, God's greatest miracles do not begin with perfect things. Sometimes, they begin with what the world has already thrown away. A pile of scrap leather. An old notebook tucked inside a forgotten workshop. A woman carrying a broken heart who chose to believe that even what seemed useless could still have purpose. While others saw waste, God gave Rachel the wisdom to see possibility. And when she chose to restore instead of discard, she discovered that healing creation can also heal people. Sometimes, the miracle is not that God gives us something new. Sometimes, the miracle is opening our eyes to the value He has already placed in what we almost overlooked. Perhaps the same is true in our own lives. Every day we meet people who feel forgotten, discouraged, or convinced that their best days are behind them. Maybe we have felt that way ourselves. But God has never measured our worth by our scars, our failures, or what others think of us. He sees the beauty hidden beneath every broken place. A kind word, a helping hand, a second chance, or simply believing in someone when no one else does may become the beginning of a miracle far greater than we can imagine. Just as those discarded pieces of leather found a new purpose, God can also bring new purpose into every willing heart. If this story touched your heart today, please share it with someone who may need a little hope. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Or share a moment when something others had given up on became one of God's greatest blessings in your life. And if you enjoy inspiring stories about faith, compassion, resilience, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, please subscribe to our channel and become part of this growing community. May God bless you, bless your family, fill your home with peace, strengthen your heart through every difficult season, guide your hands toward kindness, and remind you each day that nothing He created is ever truly without value. God bless you all.